Hello, I'm the Dark Master, and I'm a pretty big Kirby fan. Now, this is quite obvious if one just takes a look at my channel. However, up to this point, I've not really talked about the games themselves. There are a few reasons for this. First, had to get all the games and, play them, get the methods to record off these various devices, finish off two one-off documentaries that I promised to do a while ago, and in general just had other stuff that just needed to be done before I could properly give this video game series the coverage it deserves. But now, let's actually start doing this. Before I actually start the review, I need to establish a few things. First, this is not a video series. While I do intend to review the entire series in full eventually, there will likely be breaks between certain games, especially as they get more complex in later games and between the transition spots between different eras in the Kirby series. Also, I will be formatting this series differently, where there are distinct segments addressing specific aspects to the games, like development history, plot, gameplay, enemies, bosses, 100% completion requirements, etc., etc., in a more structured manner than is possible with a frankly linear anime episode, and not all games will get all of these sections, as will be explained on a case-by-case basis. But without further ado, now let us start with the review of the game that started it all, Kirby's Dreamland for the Game Boy, or as it's known in the land of the rising sun, Hoshino Kabe. Kirby's Dreamland served as the directorial debut of the notable game developer Masahiro Sakurai, though he did get a special thanks in the credits for the slightly earlier game Arcana, which is about as far removed from Kirby that a game could possibly be. Also, is it just me, or is he the only guy I've known that gets younger looking the more he ages? Huh. Other notable people in the development staff include Kiyobi Miyabi as the programmer, Tetsuya Moloya as the GDV programmer, alongside Mami Preko and Jun Ishikawa, who would continue to make music for the series to this very day. Stranger participants include Bubby and Cypher?
Oh, I know lots of things.
Lots of things.
Indeed, it appears that Rain from the Holy Day of Sunday seems to have participated in the creation of the pink puffball. I joke, but this is actually the pseudonym of the late Satoru Iwata, who helped program the game. May he rest in peace. Speaking of development, Kirby was originally a simple placeholder for a future design, but its simplistic charm worked well with Sakurai's desire to make a cute main character that everyone would love, so they decided to keep it. Originally, he was named Popopo, kind of a mouthful, but after feedback from Nintendo, a new name was requested to help cater to American audiences. However, the OG name would be referenced later in the game series. Several of the alternative names proposed included Gasper, which would be reused for a Ghost in Me in this game's extra mode. However, in the end, Kirby was chosen due to the slightly humorous contrast such a guttural name to a childlike character there was. His name was also influenced by the attorney John Joseph Kirby Jr. that helped Nintendo combat copyright issues involving Donkey Kong supposedly being too similar to Universal's King Kong, effectively saving the company during its early years. Yes, even massive corporations can be messed up by an unfair copyright complaint. Indeed, it is rumored that he was even given a copy of the game that he allegedly enjoyed. Sadly, he died on October 2nd, 2019 from myelodysplastic syndrome, a type of blood cancer. On a brighter note, there is quite a bit of concept art that's of the game's development, including wispy woods, box glove wearing eels, and a fortress in the air. Eventually, it would be released on April 27th, 1992 in Japan, while in North America it would be released on August 1st, 1992. The EU and Australia would not see the game until December of that year, unfortunately. It would then go on to sell over 5.13 million copies and held the title of the most successful installment in the series until the release of Kirby and the Forgotten Land, released in 2022, 30 years later. Very impressive. Now, however, let us start discussing the game proper, starting with the story, as simple as it may be. The story of Kirby's Dream Land is fairly straightforward. One day in the sleepy area known as Dreamland, King Dedede and a band of thieves decide to steal all the food in Dreamland, which is, as far as Kirby is concerned, a type of war crime. They also stole the sparkling stars from the sky, which is the power source of the area, which is frankly a bit more serious. Despite this, Kirby goes through 5 stages, a boss rush, and then matches with the king himself in the wrestling ring. After defeating the tyrant, he's sent flying out of the castle into the air, and Kirby, using the power of the sparkling stars, become like a large balloon and lifts the castle into the air and redistributes the food back to the citizens of Dreamland, eventually returning to his normal size and lands upon a podium to be closer to the cheering crowds. It's a pretty simple story, but I think that it's pretty well done. Plus, it's understandable that they would keep it simple, given that this is the first game in the series. Plus, it's a Game Boy game, and you can't really do a very deep, long story with that sort of format. Nothing groundbreaking, but still solid. But now let's talk about what is the most important aspect of really any game, that being the gameplay. Kirby's Dream Land's gameplay is arguably just as simple as the plot. You can use the left to right arrows to move Kirby to the left or right. If you press A, Kirby will jump. Pressing up on the D-pad causes Kirby to float, which Kirby can do indefinitely. Theoretically, one could think that the ability to float over all the level design would make the game boring, but actually, in terms of structure, I find that all 5 of the stages had memorable qualities to them, likely due to the higher than average graphic design, as well as some smart level design choices, especially in Castle Lololo with its tight corridors that means that Kirby can't really take advantage of his flight quite as much. Pressing B causes Kirby to inhale enemies or objects like star blocks. Pressing it again with something in his mouth causes him to spit it out as a projectile, while pressing B in the air causes him to let out an air bullet, which can kill an enemy. With the down arrow, Kirby can crouch or, while something in his mouth, swallow. Here we see that Kirby's Dream Land lacks perhaps Kirby's most iconic ability, the copy abilities. Yeah, they're just not here. And without them, you really notice Kirby is, mechanically speaking, a very simple game and fairly easy given he gets 6 hit points, which is far more than in other games such as, Super Mario Land. Some go as far as to call it bland, which I disagree with for several reasons. First, there are several items that help break up standard gameplay. There's, of course, the standard 1-up that gives a player an extra life, energy drinks that can restore 2 bars of health, and Maxim tomatoes that fully heal Kirby's 6 points of health. Then there is the invincibility candy, which, true to its name, gives Kirby an invincibility status for a short period of time. But of far more substance, there are several items that would, I believe, later evolve into copy abilities. There's the bomb that can be inhaled and spit out to kill multiple foes. Then there is super spicy curry, which gives Kirby such terrible heartburn that he literally starts breathing fire. It hasn't been seen really often since the original game, but was in the anime, surprisingly enough. In fact, I've already reviewed that episode if you're interested. Arguably, more people know about it from Smash Brothers than from Kirby. Then there is the microphone, which Kirby can suck up and then spit out to generate a terrible sound that serves as a screen nuke, akin to Mike Kirby. Then there is the mint leaf, which is, when ingested, causes Kirby for a limited time to remain puffed up and be able to spit multiple puffs of air. This is primarily used in the boss fight against Kabula. And finally, there is the Warp Star, which is a glorified screen transition akin to a door in a Resident Evil game. Secondly, the game is overall short. Even if you include the extra mode, you can beat it in an hour and a half, meaning whatever blandness the game's gameplay has doesn't really become evident, as even though it's very easy, it does give some neat experiences. Speaking of that, let's talk about those aspects now, starting with the graphics. Kirby's Dreamland is a beautiful game, especially for the Game Boy. Indeed, I would go as far as to say perhaps the greatest looking game on the console. Yeah, I know that for some 8-bit games, especially those in black and white, simply are too archaic slash ugly to appreciate, and I can understand given the likes of such as Super Mario Land, but I think that due to the choice of a more cartoony art style and simplistic character design, it not only has aged really well, but has stood the tests of time. Each of the 5 stages that Kirby's traveled through managed to have their own style and aesthetics that are iconic to this day. There's Green Greens, which is your typical first world grassland slash wooded area. Castle Lololo, which is a castle with, as I've said before, many tight corridors, several alternative ways through the level, and just a general gothic aesthetic. Float Islands is a 3rd stage, which is a tropical island vibe and exploding coconuts. Then there is the 5th stage, Bubbly Clouds. True to its name, takes place high in the sky with a bunch of cloudy aesthetics. Each of these stages has a short intro cutscene that pack in a lot of charm, especially considering Kirby gets a fishhook rammed into his cheek. Ah! The final stage is sadly not as memorable, as it's really just a glorified boss rush where Kirby faces all the previous bosses before facing the king himself. It's not much, but does have a sort of arena vibe that, even though not as quite as strong as the others, still does stand out. But now that we have finished the graphics, let's talk about the other aspect, the music. Kirby's Dreamland music is iconic, and nearly all of it has been widely reused in the franchise, and is familiar outside of it. In fact, I've even used some of it in this video already. From the upbeat and shipper title screen theme of Welcome to Dreamland to the even more upbeat Green Greens theme. This has been heard a lot in the other games, and rightfully so, as it's just a great way to start off a game. The Casalolo theme is a bit more militaristic and frankly gothic compared to the previous one I talked about, and returns often in the series for good reason. Float Islands is a far more tropical slash Polynesian style music that, again, has become quite the staple in the game series. The Bubbly Clouds theme is dreamlike and its ballroom type serenity compared to the other themes means that it also stands out. The theme called Shooting has ironically become associated with the boss Kabula, but was actually originally meant to be the theme for the item known as a mint leaf. King Dedede's theme would forever be associated with the king, only surpassed when the masked Dedede theme was introduced in Kirby Superstar Ultra. And frankly, I love it. It gives off the vibe of a tyrant in the wrestling ring, and I think it covers the sort of greedy arrogance of the king very well. The ending credits theme is very hopeful and gives the credits a greater impact than they otherwise would, only aiding in the joyous occasion of having gotten all their food back. The entrance theme seen in Mount Dedede prior to facing the king really works for how simple it is, though admittedly due to the short period of time that is being there, unfortunately you don't really hear it much. The only music that frankly doesn't stand out that much and I have a slight negative opinion on is the boss theme for the bosses other than King Dedede and Kabula. Even then, it's not bad, but just rather more average compared to the others, and really doesn't have much impact on me, which is reflected in that it's not been reused slash remixed as much in future games. Now that we've discussed the graphics and sound, how about we discuss the many foes and challenges that Kirby must face in his travels to stop the tyrant DDD? Kirby's Dreamland, being of course the first game, has introduced many enemies that have since become iconic for the Kirby franchise. There's the Goomba equivalent Waddle Dee that walks left to right. There's the Cyclopean relative Waddle Doo that will shoot a beam at Kirby whenever he's not walking left to right. Then there's Bronto Birds, which will fly around. The superficially adorable Scarfies that chase after Kirby if he tries to inhale them, turning into these abominations that will eventually explode after a time. You got Sir Kibble, who tosses a bladed boomerang at Kirby and who in future games would give Kirby the cutter ability. The Moa Head Kaboo that teleports on occasion. Gordos that are these sea urchins that are completely invincible to all attacks in game, and in extra mode do 3 points of damage. Half your health bar gone away. Gosh darn. Other Kirby mainstays that made their debut include Shotzo, an otherwise invincible immobile cannon that shoots cannonballs at Kirby, normally pausing after 3 shots. Then there's the mushroom-like Cappies, which are particularly familiar to those who like the anime and watch my reviews. Despite resembling mushrooms, they're actually inspired by the Japanese Haniwa figures and actually are not true mushrooms as they're meant to just be disguises, which kind of explains why the anime left off that aspect of the design. In the waters, you see other iconic enemies such as the scuba mask wearing Blipper, the anemone glunk, and the squid squishy. There's also the parasail, which will become not an enemy in future games. Then there's Poppy Bros Jr., also appears in this game, though he doesn't toss bombs, unlike in future games. There's Mummies, who also appear for the first time and cannot be inhaled. They're kind of immobile in this game, though future ones would refine them further. There's Grizzo, a large bear-like enemy that shows up. Sadly, not all of the first game's enemies have been so lucky, especially in the extra mode, and many have faded into irrelevance. Not that all of these more obscure enemies are bad slash bland. You got Blatzy, which is a cannon on crack. I mean, seriously, look at it go. It's just shooting stuff randomly. But there's also these guys that are just frankly kind of generic in terms of design, albeit they're put through the filter of Kirby cuteness. Booler is a ghost, Gasper is a ghost in a cap, though it does have a name with an interesting trivia behind it, which I discussed earlier, being a former name for Kirby. You know, Flapper is a bat, Floatzo is an octopus, Puffy is a cloud in shades, Twizzy is a baby chicken, Tukey is an adult chicken that replaces it in extra mode, Cocoon is a pelican, Whizzer is a cyclops clam, Peezer is a crab, Connor is a hermit crab, there's Grumples, an angry tiki. There's Koklera, which is a decapitated demon head. I mean, that's kind of neat. Whiskers, which is a decapitated cat head. I mean, that's kind of morbid. Yet appeared in the anime, surprisingly enough. There's Sculler, the floating skull, Chucky, and its near identical replacement Hurley that are somewhat memorable due to popping out of question blocks that seem right out of the Mario game and again appeared in the anime in a very disturbing reimagining that's just kind of strange. There's Dizzy and Benny, two guys I can't really describe except that they're vaguely clown like and bubble around in bubbly clouds. I mean, what are these guys? Cruiser is a Bronto Burt, but in black, that appears in extra mode. The Two Face is a haunted mask that attacks when Kirby gets too close. Wait, does this mean that Batman's canon to the Kirby universe? Its extra mode replacement, Mr. P. Umpkin, has the same basic traits but has a funny name so it's more forgivable. And then you get the OK Boomer enemy that serves as the replacement for Sir Kibble. But I mean, really, who wants to be a boomer? Overall, the common enemies of the game are all rather simplistic, both design wise and programming wise, but are all memorable, whether or not they lasted much further through the franchise or not. Stepping up from the common fare, we get the game's mini bosses, of which there are three. Green sees Poppy Bros Sr., which is a larger version of Poppy Bros Jr. He jumps around throwing bombs at Kirby. In the extra mode, he moves faster and occasionally charges at Kirby and will throw three bombs at a much faster rate than in the base game. The second mini boss is arguably not even one, being a one on one fight between Kirby and Lololo, who pushes blocks at Kirby, kicking at them very hard. In extra mode, he walks faster and will also kick Gordos at Kirby, which I remind people can kill Kirby even at max health in 2 hits. The third and final mini boss is Kracko Jr., whose name confuses me as he's not the son of the real Kracko, but rather its larval form. It floats around, dropping black balls on Kirby and occasionally summons a Waddle Doo that Kirby must inhale to shoot back at him. In extra mode, he flies faster and drops explosive bombs instead of Waddle Doos. All these mini bosses are perfectly fine if mechanically simple. Poppy Bros Senior would have to be my favorite as it's the most visually unique. Not saying the others are bad, Kracko Jr. is neat, but they're just too reliant on the bosses visually to have quite the same impact as both the Poppy Bros Senior and future mini bosses. However, now let's discuss the bosses and how they are. Starting with Wispy Woods, yes, he's a freaking tree. Now you might ask why Kirby doesn't just walk around him. However, what these easy jokes miss is the fact that Wispy Woods possesses one of the sparkling stars. In terms of the fight, he'll blow air at Kirby and drop apples upon him. Honestly, understandably, he's considered one of the easiest games through video games. And in the base game, yeah, that's true. But in the extra mode, in addition to moving faster, he drops Gordos, which, again, I must stress, kill you in 2 hits. Darn. Then you got Lololo and Lalala, who push blocks at Kirby. They don't really change in extra mode, but get faster, and they're not that hard, really. They're kind of forgettable, but I bet you didn't know this, but they are actually a reference to Hal's earlier games, The Adventures of Lolo, which is a franchise that's since been completely abandoned. But hey, it's neat to see that it lives on, at least in some form. Kabula is the most annoying boss in the game and arguably even harder than King Dedede. This bothersome blimp has 4 times the health of the final boss. She flies around shooting cannons and will charge occasionally at Kirby. The annoyance comes from 2 things. First, Kabula moves very fast, even more so in extra mode, and will charge at Kirby on occasion. But the real issue comes when she shoots her cannons, which, due to Kirby's sheer size, are very hard to dodge. Even with the difficulty, it still stands out and left quite the impression on me. And you can clearly see the inspiration this fight had on future games. Krakow is the 4th boss, and in terms of fight, he's a lot less hard. He floats through the room, stopping at the 2 sides of the room. He fires beams all around and will create waddle doos, which you as a player have to be suck them up and hit him with. The extra game changes his behavior so that it becomes much faster and will now charge the ground, moving along the top and dropping bombs on Kirby. Another good boss, and it makes sense why he became such an iconic boss that would return again and again, and is one of the most changed in the extra mode when it comes to the bosses. But I've saved the best boss fight for the last one, which is fitting that it's the final boss, King Dedede, taking place in a frankly well designed wrestling arena bearing his symbol, and you can see the arrogance going off him. He possesses the most complex range of abilities of the bosses that we face. He, of course, will run around, occasionally tripping slash lunging at Kirby. I wonder if this inspired that annoying tripping gimmick in Super Smash Bros. Brawl. Though that may be the case, in this fight I do think it adds a lot of charm and isn't really that frustrating. He will also try to hit Kirby with his hammer, as well as leap upon the poor pink puffball. These 2 attacks will generate impact stars that Kirby, the player, must suck up and hit him with. He'll also try to suck up Kirby to spin him out and cause a great amount of damage. Extra mode doesn't see him change much, though he does get faster and jumps more often and farther. While perhaps not the greatest change compared to, say, Krakow, I do think it's the best boss fight in the game, not just mechanically, but thematically. What better to contrast an innocent pink puffball than a corpulent thief turned tyrant? And frankly, it's just amazing. Combine that with the theme that I discussed earlier, and man, this is just perfection. I will genuinely say I think that this is one of the best final bosses in the history of video games. It's not the hardest. However, I still think, even if you take its easiness into account, it's just amazing. Now let us discuss the completion requirements of the game and my final thoughts on the game as a whole. So, in order to 100% complete this game, you gotta go through the base game. It's short and darn easy. After beating that, you unlock Extra Mode, which makes a lot of changes, some of which I've discussed before, like how everything is in general faster. Some enemies get replaced by stronger ones, though most are just glorified palette swaps like Dizzy and Benny. Others have different tactics, like how Grumples and Koozer actively chase after Kirby. Good old Boomer will throw 2 boomerangs instead of Sir Kibble's one, and Blopper, instead of just being a Cappy replacement, will scatter deadly frosting everywhere. Even the enemies that aren't replaced get new behaviors, like Waddle Dees and Doos jump now in addition to running around, and the Gordos take half of your freaking health, man. Even the apples can kill you, and the paracells chase after you like the Terminator in extra mode. But man, the Gordos, I want to return to those a bit. There's a secret room in one of the moons in one of the stages. I'm not going to specify which because I want to give you a chance to find it for yourself, which has you fall into some one ups. Is just filled with these Gordos in extra mode. I mean, seriously, you would actually die in this bonus room. They're also the reason Wispy Woods is actually somewhat challenging because, frankly, this is the only time he's ever been somewhat of an issue in the entire series. Oh, no, it's still pretty easy, but still, Gordos are just trash. After the end of beating the extra game, you get a code for debug mode, which allows the player to control/alter Kirby's total lives and health points. Meaning that if the game is still too hard for you, you can make it easier, though I don't know why you would, given you beat the extra mode. There's even the mega challenge you can possibly do where you set up a one hit run. Whoa. Now, technically, both of these modes can be accessed prior to beating their respective requirements by checking the internet, but don't do that. The game is already short enough, being at most to complete it an hour and a half long. And frankly, I think you should actually complete it as it gives the game a more fulfilling experience. But what about my final thoughts? How is this game and how do I think it stands up? Well, as someone who didn't actually grow up with this game but went back after I got into the series, I have to admit I still like this, but I can give somewhat of a nuanced take. Due to being the first game in the franchise, it doesn't have all the refinements that future games have, most notably the lack of copy abilities. It has been described as a fairly forgettable game, and while I disagree that it is boring, it does lack the level of replayability that future games have. With that being said, I do think it's still worth playing to see how the series started, and there's quite a number of seeds of stuff in the franchise that this game set the basis for. And I don't just mean like the obvious stuff, like the characters or the music and, the level themes, but even the power ups in many cases seem to have inspired some of the future copy abilities. And you can see it. Microphone eventually became Mike, Super Spicy Curry became Fire, and Bomb, well, eventually became Bomb. So yeah, you should play this game, if only to see how the series started. You can either play it on the original Game Boy, you can play it on the GameCube, or on the 3DS Virtual Console, the Nintendo Switch Online. It was also re-released alongside a bunch of other classic Kirby games in the Kirby's Dream Collection Special Edition, which yes, I will eventually review as well. So, yeah, there's a lot of options if you want to play it, or you could emulate it, I guess, if it's too much of an issue. I'm the Dark Master, and I hope you enjoyed this video. And if you did, consider subscribing and having a nice day. I put a lot of effort into this, and I would love to hear your thoughts. Feel free to leave it in the description down below. I know this is a bit out of the ordinary, but I hope to be doing more of these reviews in the future. Peace out, and have a great day.